My parents tried to force me into paying my sister's wedding expenses, so I walked away silently and bought my own home instead. I'm a 27-year-old guy who's always been treated like the responsible one, the safe option, the backup wallet whenever my family needed rescuing. My younger sister was the golden child everyone adored, praised, and protected even when she made reckless choices or demanded too much. My parents leaned on me for money so often that it stopped feeling like help and started feeling like obligation disguised as love. "You're strong," my mother would say softly, "you understand sacrifice better than she does." The way she said it almost sounded like praise, but it hollowed me out every time. When my sister got engaged, the entire house changed overnight, like we were preparing for royalty instead of a simple wedding. My parents spoke about venues and dresses with glowing excitement while my own worries stayed lodged in silence. I remember my mom smiling too brightly and saying, "Everyone contributes to family milestones," and my chest tightened instantly. Years of quiet overtime, skipped vacations, and careful saving flashed before my eyes like something fragile about to shatter. I watched my sister twirl in front of a mirror, laughing about her dream day, while I imagined my future slipping further away. The air felt heavier, the walls too close, like even the house knew what was coming. I didn't say anything, but deep down a quiet dread began whispering that this celebration wasn't joy at all. It felt like the first step toward me losing everything I had built, and I wasn't sure how much longer I could pretend this was normal. Still, I forced a weak smile and told myself it would just be a small contribution, a temporary compromise, even as my mother's hopeful eyes lingered on me with an expectation that felt heavier than any spoken demand tonight. That I should have known something was coming the moment my parents asked me to sit down. "We need to talk," in that calm, rehearsed tone that always meant trouble. We sat at the worn dining table, the same one where every guilt trip of my childhood had been served, and my mother folded her hands as if she were about to deliver sacred news. "The wedding plans have gotten a little expensive," she said gently, sliding a printed list toward me, "and your sister's fiancé's family is struggling right now." The paper felt thin in my fingers, but the numbers printed on it made my heart hammer so hard I could hear it in my ears. My father cleared his throat and added, "You're the stable one. You always think about the big picture. This is just you stepping up for family." He smiled like this was some noble opportunity, not a slow financial execution. I tried to process the totals, the venue fees, the catering, the open bar, the custom decorations, and all I could think about was the down payment I'd calculated 100 times in my head for my own future home. My sister didn't even look apologetic. She leaned back in her chair, scrolling through her phone, and said breezily, "It's not that much for you, you'll make it back eventually." Something inside me twisted painfully, like a knot being pulled tighter with every word. "I've been saving for years," I muttered, my voice barely steady, but my mother quickly interrupted, "And that makes you responsible, honey. That's why we trust you." They kept repeating words like support, love, unity, as if wrapping my sacrifice in pretty language would soften the blow. I felt the familiar leash of guilt tighten around my chest, that old voice reminding me that good sons don't hesitate, good sons don't say no. My palms were damp, my throat dry, and every instinct screamed to walk away, but I heard myself whisper, "Okay, if that's what you need," while my heart silently begged me to stop. I didn't mean to eavesdrop, but their voices carried down the hallway like thin blades of sound, slicing through the quiet of the house. My sister's laugh floated first, sharp and excited. "The dress I want is just unreal," she gushed to one of her friends on speaker, "custom lace, imported silk, and the designer says it'll only add a few thousand if I want the detailing perfect." I froze near the doorway, the smell of fresh coffee cooling in my mug, as she continued rattling off venue upgrades and gold-trimmed centerpieces like she was shopping without a limit. Then she said it, so casually it almost felt rehearsed. "It's fine, my brother will handle it. He always does." Her words landed like a slap across my chest, sudden and stinging. I watched her twirl in front of the mirror, admiring herself, completely unbothered by the fact that her fantasy was quietly carving pieces out of my future. My throat tightened as laughter echoed through the phone again, followed by, "Yeah, he's basically part of the wedding budget at this point." Something inside me cracked, slow and painful, like a long-held illusion finally shattering. All this time, I'd convinced myself my help mattered, that my sacrifices meant something deeper than convenience. But standing there, listening to her talk about my savings like a bottomless account, I realized The calls started the very next morning, sharp and relentless, like my phone itself had turned against me. "Family sticks together no matter what," my mother kept repeating, her voice syrupy but firm, as if saying it enough times would erase the knot growing inside my chest. By the end of the week, it wasn't just reminders anymore, it was a detailed inventory of everything they'd ever done for me. "We fed you, clothed you, paid for your school trips," my father snapped over the line, "and now you hesitate when your own sister needs you." Each word landed like a bill I never knew I owed. When I tried to explain that I had my own plans, my own future I was trying to build, they laughed it off with bitter disbelief. "Future," my mother scoffed. "You're being selfish. This is about family, not your fantasy house." There was something I'd never told them, a quiet piece of my life I'd guarded like a secret lifeline, and now it suddenly felt more fragile than ever. For months, I'd been speaking to a realtor, walking through open houses, measuring empty rooms with hopeful eyes, imagining sunlight pooling on floors that would finally be mine. I'd kept it hidden because I knew, deep down, that if my family discovered I was close to buying my own home, they would find a way to pull it apart before it ever became real. This dream was the only thing that still felt pure, untouched by their expectations. Now, every time my phone buzzed with their names, it felt like a threat rather than a conversation. My heart would tighten before I even answered, already bracing myself for more pressure, more demands disguised as concern. "The costs have gone up," my mother announced one evening, as if this was casual news about the weather. "The wedding has to meet expectations, you know how people talk." My father's voice chimed in behind her, firm and unapologetic, "It's not just any wedding, it's your sister's big day. We can't let her be embarrassed." They spoke about my sister's image as if it mattered more than my entire future. The ultimatum came on a Sunday evening, the kind of night that always used to feel safe and familiar until they stripped it of warmth forever. My parents sat stiffly across from me, their faces set with a cold resolve I'd never seen before, like strangers rehearsing lines. "We've made our decision," my father said flatly. "Either you pay what your sister needs, or you don't show your face here again." The words echoed in the room, heavy and final, as if they'd already convinced themselves this was reasonable. My mother's voice trembled, but not with concern for me. "We can't have negativity like this around such a special moment," she whispered, pressing her hand to her chest. "If you choose not to help, you're choosing to walk away from this family." It hit me then that they weren't asking for support anymore. They were demanding loyalty at the price of my own life. My sister burst into dramatic tears, her mascara already smudging as she sobbed, "How can you do this to me? You're supposed to love me, not ruin my wedding." She wouldn't even look at me, just clutched my mother's arm like I'd already betrayed her. I stood there in stunned silence, the air thick and suffocating, every heartbeat filled with disbelief. It wasn't the money that hurt the most, it was the realization that love had become a weapon they weren't afraid to use. All those years of sacrifice, of quiet compromise, of swallowing my own needs, and none of it mattered unless I kept giving. I saw it clearly in that moment, they were ready to erase me from their lives as long as her perfect day stayed intact. Something inside me went still, like an exhausted muscle finally giving up the fight. I didn't argue back. I didn't beg. I didn't explain myself again. I simply nodded, as if accepting something inevitable, and felt an unfamiliar numbness. I stopped answering their calls the way someone flicks off a light that's been burning their eyes for too long, slowly at first, then all at once. What used to be endless explanations and apologies turned into one-word replies, a cold, busy, or later, when they cornered me with messages. My phone would vibrate non-stop, their names flashing like warnings, and I'd let it ring until the screen went dark again. In the quiet that followed, I felt a strange mix of fear and relief, like I was finally breathing but unsure how long the air would last. Behind the scenes, my life kept moving forward in a way they had no idea about. I met my realtor in hushed coffee shops, my hands slightly shaking as we reviewed listings and numbers like they were classified secrets. Walking into that first nearly empty house, the faint smell of fresh paint and polished wood felt like stepping into a future that was actually mine. When I signed the preliminary paperwork, the pen scratched softly across the page, and my chest tightened with an emotion I could barely name. It wasn't just a signature, it was proof that my life didn't have to orbit around their demands anymore. This was the moment my quiet rebellion began, not with shouting or slammed doors, but with silence so deliberate it almost scared me. I stopped answering their calls one by one, letting them ring until the screen went dark again, my chest tightening every time their names lit up. When messages came through, I kept my replies short, hollow, and distant. Okay, noted, busy, words that felt colder than anything I'd ever said to them before. Each unanswered call felt like a tiny act of defiance, and strangely, also like a fragile kind of freedom. Behind the scenes, my real life was finally moving forward. I met with the realtor in hushed offices that smelled faintly of paper and polished wood, signing forms with hands that trembled but never stopped. The sound of the pen. I heard about the unraveling before they ever said it out loud, whispers reaching me through distant relatives and half-finished phone calls that cut off too quickly. The venue they'd boasted about suddenly became too expensive, the caterer inconvenient, the luxury decorations unnecessary, and I could almost feel the desperation creeping in behind every forced smile. My parents started making frantic calls, their voices thin and brittle as they begged uncles, cousins, and anyone who would listen for just a little help. It was strange watching the grand fantasy they built on my back begin to collapse without me even lifting a finger. My sister's panic spilled into the family grapevine almost immediately. "This isn't what I planned," she allegedly cried, her once perfect vision shrinking into something smaller, more ordinary. The designer dress became a rented one. The extravagant venue turned into something modest and disappointing. And suddenly, my phone began buzzing again, no longer aggressive, no longer accusing, just soft, pleading tones dripping with false warmth. "We just need to talk," my mother whispered in a voice that sounded painfully sweet. "Things are getting stressful, and your sister is really struggling." My father followed with messages longer than I'd ever seen him send, filled with strained concern and nostalgia. "Son, we miss you. Family shouldn't fight like this. We can fix everything." Hearing that shift, that sudden gentleness after weeks of cruelty, twisted something bitter in my chest. They didn't miss me. They missed the stability my money had brought them. My sister even left a voice note, sniffling, saying, "I never meant for it to go this far. I just need some help." I sat there staring at my phone, the screen glowing in the dim light, hearing every emotional hook being thrown at me again. But this time, I didn't feel guilt. I felt clarity, sharp and unwavering. Their chaos, their panic, their so-called softness only. I didn't plan some dramatic announcement or heartfelt caption, just a simple photo taken from my phone late one evening, the kind you capture without thinking too much. The key rested in my palm, catching the warm glow of the porch light, and behind it stood the front door of my new home, plain, quiet, real. I posted it online with no explanation, no context, no emotional paragraph to soften the blow. Just the image, raw and unfiltered, like a silent truth I'd finally allowed to exist. The reaction came fast, faster than I expected. Notifications flooded my screen like a storm I'd been bracing for. Friends congratulated me, coworkers praised my hard work, but then the messages from my family began to roll in, sharp and feral. "How could you do this while your sister is?" Silence became the loudest thing I'd ever chosen, and for the first time, it didn't feel like punishment, it felt like protection. In the quiet of my new home, surrounded by bare walls and the faint echo of my own footsteps, I realized how much of my life had been swallowed by voices that never truly cared. The soft hum of the refrigerator, the distant sound of cars passing outside, even the creak of the floorboards beneath me felt strangely comforting, like proof that this space belonged only to me. No one here demanded explanations, no one measured my worth by what I could give. My house became more than just a building, it was a sanctuary where I could finally breathe without bracing myself for emotional impact. I started small, arranging furniture slowly, choosing colors that soothed me, letting sunlight pour through windows without anyone commenting on how unnecessary my comfort was. Late at night, I'd sit on the floor, back against the wall, overwhelmed by the realization that peace could feel this real. In therapy, I poured out years of resentment, guilt, and invisible pressure, and my therapist gently reminded me, you were never responsible for carrying them all. Hearing that out loud cracked something open inside me, and for once, it wasn't pain. My sister stopped reaching out completely, the silence from her sharper than any insult she'd ever hurled my way. I'd expected that to hurt more, but instead, it felt like a final release, like cutting a thread that had been choking me for too long. Without their noise, their expectations, their manipulation, I slowly started to hear my own voice again. It was quieter than I remembered, but stronger too. One evening, I stood at my front window watching the sky melt into soft shades of dusk and whispered, almost in disbelief, I'm okay. The words felt fragile but honest, like the beginning of something new. And as I turned away, stepping deeper into the home I built with sacrifice and strength, I realized this life finally belonged to me, and no one could take it away again. Silence became the loudest voice I ever used, louder than any argument, louder than every tear I swallowed to keep the peace. In the quiet of my new home, where no one knocked demanding explanations or payments, I finally understood how deeply they had conditioned me to feel guilty for choosing myself. The floors creaked softly beneath my bare feet, the scent of fresh paint still lingering in the air, and for once, the space around me felt safe instead of suffocating. My home wasn't just walls and a roof, it was proof that I could exist without being owned by anyone's expectations. I started therapy not because I felt broken, but because I needed to unlearn the belief that love meant sacrifice without limits. Sitting in that small, sunlit office, I finally said the words out loud, I feel like I was only valued when I paid for things. My therapist listened quietly, then gently said, you were never responsible for fixing their lives. That sentence hit harder than anything my family had ever said, and in that moment, something inside me softened for the first time in years. My sister stopped speaking to me entirely, her silence sharp but strangely peaceful. No more guilt-ridden voicemails. No more fake apologies or dramatic accusations. Just distance. And instead of the expected heartbreak, I felt relief, a deep, steady calm that surprised me. I began waking up without dread, drinking coffee while sunlight filtered across my kitchen counter, feeling ownership over simple moments that had once felt impossible. At night, when the world finally quieted, I'd sit by the window and listen to the hum of the city, realizing how far I'd come from the boy who believed love had a price tag. For the first time, my future didn't feel like a compromise. It felt like mine. And as the stillness wrapped around me like a protective blanket, I wondered how long it would take before they finally understood that I was never selfish, I was just done surviving in a home that never wanted me to thrive.